For 2 years, the world watched as a nation without a traditional navy systematically dismantled the Russian Black Sea Fleet. By forcing Moscow's warships into retreat and rendering the Crimean Peninsula militarily suffocated, Kiev proved that the era of multi-billion-dollar naval supremacy could be undone by remote-controlled explosive drones. Now, that exact same blueprint is quietly moving to the most vital, dangerous maritime chokepoint on the planet. As Washington tightens a sophisticated maritime blockade to choke off illicit energy networks, the Gulf states have realized they need a radical new defense against Iran's swarming fast boats and Shahed drones. Their solution isn't coming from the Pentagon, it's coming from Ukraine, and it changes the strategic calculus in the Strait of Hormuz forever. The Strait of Hormuz has long been the global economy's most sensitive nerve. Every day, millions of barrels of oil pass through this narrow waterway, serving as the critical artery for energy markets worldwide. But the rules of engagement in the Gulf are shifting rapidly. Diplomatic maneuvering is taking a backseat to raw military deterrence as regional actors face a complex, multi-layered crisis. On one side, a U.S.-led coalition is executing a highly targeted maritime interdiction campaign. This isn't a traditional blanket blockade. It is a calculated, technology-driven effort utilizing aerial surveillance and selective interdiction to sever the clandestine energy routes that fund Iranian operations and feed China's shadow economy. The pressure is mounting, and the economic strain is radiating across the Middle East. In response, Iran has doubled down on its doctrine of asymmetric naval warfare. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps relies on massive swarms of heavily armed fast boats and an ever-expanding arsenal of Shahed attack drones. For the wealthy Gulf states, nations whose prosperity depends entirely on safe, uninterrupted maritime traffic, this represents an existential threat. They are losing billions of dollars in delayed shipments, damaged infrastructure, and skyrocketing insurance premiums. The traditional security umbrella provided by Western destroyers and frigates is stretched thin, struggling to defend vast commercial convoys against low-cost, high-volume drone swarms. The Gulf needs a different kind of weapon to counter this specific threat. Before we examine the exact naval drone variants quietly arriving in the region, make sure to subscribe to the channel to track these evolving geopolitical flashpoints with us. To understand why Gulf capitals are quietly signing decade-long defense frameworks with Kiev, you have to look past the hardware and examine the underlying doctrine. Ukraine didn't just defeat the Russian Black Sea Fleet. They fundamentally rewrote the tactical manual for coastal denial. Military strategists refer to this approach as the untouchable siege. It is a method of warfare that does not rely on occupying territory or maintaining a massive, visible naval presence. Instead, it focuses on systematically rendering a highly contested maritime space militarily unlivable for the adversary. We saw this play out with devastating precision around the Crimean Peninsula. Kiev recognized early on that it could not match Moscow hull for hull. Instead, Ukrainian forces launched a relentless multi-vector attrition campaign. They targeted logistics nodes, air bases, and critical supply corridors like the Kerch Bridge. But the true tip of the spear was the constant, unpredictable deployment of unmanned surface vessels. By persistently threatening Russian warships in their own anchorages, Ukraine forced the entire Black Sea Fleet to effectively abandon Crimea and retreat to the safer, albeit distant, port of Novorossiysk. The brilliance of this blueprint lies in its economic and operational math. The untouchable siege forces a heavier, traditional military to constantly burn through its most expensive and finite defensive resources. A guided missile cruiser might successfully destroy 5 incoming sea drones, but the cost of the interceptor missiles and the operational wear and tear vastly outweigh the price of the drones themselves. Eventually, the defense becomes financially and logistically unsustainable. The larger fleet is paralyzed, not necessarily by sinking, but by the overwhelming cost of simply staying afloat in a hostile zone. This is exactly the strategic calculus that the Gulf states want to import. Nations like the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia possess highly advanced, Western-equipped militaries, but utilizing a billion-dollar destroyer to chase down a fleet of wooden speedboats or swat away cheap loitering munitions is a losing proposition. The Gulf requires a standoff capability. They need a way to project lethal deterrence directly into the Strait of Hormuz without exposing their most valuable naval assets to Iranian asymmetric ambushes. By adopting Ukraine's doctrine of remote attrition, the Gulf states can establish a persistent, low-risk presence in the waterway. If Iranian fast boats attempt to harass commercial shipping or swarm a tanker, the defending nations no longer have to risk a major international incident by deploying a frigate. They can respond with equal or greater asymmetric force, operating from the shadows. Of course, executing an untouchable siege requires more than just a theoretical framework. It requires combat-proven hardware that can survive contested waters, resist heavy electronic warfare, and deliver a knockout blow to fortified targets. And that is where Ukraine's most notorious naval export steps into the spotlight. The physical backbone of this strategic shift is the Magura V7. Over the past 2 years, it has evolved from a rudimentary explosive boat into a highly sophisticated maritime strike platform. Cruising at 23 knots and capable of sprinting at nearly 40, it possesses the speed necessary to run down or evade regional fast attack craft. But its true lethality lies in its endurance and payload. With an operational range of 800 nautical miles, a Magura can loiter in the deep waters of the Gulf for up to 48 hours, carrying a devastating 1,400-pound explosive charge capable of breaking the keel of a modern warship. If anyone doubts the platform's capability to penetrate layered defenses, the proof exists outside the Black Sea. During the recent NATO Repmus war games off the coast of Portugal, Ukrainian operators piloting Maguras were cast as the opposing force against Western naval assets. In multiple simulated engagements, the drones managed to slip past advanced sonar and radar perimeters. They successfully approached target vessels undetected and simulated the sinking of at least one NATO frigate, proving that even top-tier defense networks struggle against a low-profile, high-speed swarm. Yet, sinking ships only solves half the equation in the Strait of Hormuz. The more pressing daily threat to Gulf commerce comes from the sky, specifically the relentless deployment of Iranian Shahed loitering munitions. Land-based air defenses are vital for protecting cities, but they cannot project a reliable defensive umbrella out over moving commercial convoys in open water. Ukraine faced this exact vulnerability when defending its own grain corridors, and its engineers responded by fundamentally changing the role of the surface drone. Recent operational footage released by Kiev confirmed a massive leap in capability. The Magura has been modified to act as a mobile mothership for aerial defense. Instead of solely carrying a warhead, these specialized variants are equipped with launch rails for agile, high-speed interceptor drones. In a documented world first, a Ukrainian naval drone positioned miles offshore successfully tracked an incoming Russian Shahed-type munition, launched an interceptor directly from its deck, and achieved a catastrophic mid-air kill. The strategic implications of this mechanism are staggering. It effectively transforms a relatively cheap surface vessel into a forward-deployed, stealthy air defense battery. A Magura mothership can operate with a minimal electronic signature, quietly escorting a Saudi or Emirati oil tanker through the chokepoint. If an aerial swarm approaches, the drone surfaces its arrays and fires. If a hostile fast boat attempts an ambush, the platform can deploy heavy machine gun fire or detonate its primary payload. For the Gulf states, acquiring this system isn't about buying experimental hardware. It is about importing a combat-proven, multi-domain solution that neutralizes both the air and sea threats currently choking their economic lifelines. For decades, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy has designed its forces specifically to fight a much larger, technologically superior adversary. Knowing they could never outgun a Western carrier strike group in a conventional shootout, Tehran built an entire maritime doctrine around asymmetric saturation. They rely on the sheer volume of heavily armed fast attack craft, agile mini-submarines, and coastal anti-ship missile batteries. It is a philosophy of sea denial by thousands of tiny cuts, designed to overwhelm the radar screens and defensive perimeters of massive, slow-moving commercial vessels. The effectiveness of this Iranian doctrine relies entirely on a severe imbalance of risk. A commercial supertanker has virtually no defensive capabilities, making it a highly vulnerable target for a swarm of speedboats equipped with heavy machine guns and rockets. Even when protected by Allied destroyers, the mathematical advantage belongs to the attacker. The defending warship is a large, highly visible asset that must use expensive, limited interceptors to fend off cheap, expendable threats. If just one fast boat or loitering munition slips through the defensive net, the resulting damage can instantly halt global maritime traffic. This is precisely why the introduction of Ukraine's unmanned surface vessels represents a severe disruption to Iranian calculations. The Magura V-7 and its interceptor-carrying variants act as the natural predators of the fast boat swarm. By deploying their own network of explosive drones, the Gulf states can turn Iran's asymmetric warfare back on itself. The defensive coalition now possesses an expendable, low-signature weapon system that can hunt the hunters in the shallow, cluttered waters of the Strait of Hormuz. Consider the tactical reality of a future maritime engagement. If Iranian forces attempt to harass a convoy, they will no longer face a predictable, towering frigate on the horizon. Instead, they must contend with a counter-swarm of low-profile drones lurking in the water, guided by advanced satellite communications and resistant to electronic jamming. The Ukrainian-designed vessels are faster than many of the Iranian attack craft and carry an explosive payload massive enough to instantly obliterate any small boat they intercept. The asymmetric advantage evaporates when the defending force is also trading expendable, unmanned metal. Furthermore, Iran's estimated fleet of nearly 30 coastal submarines, which have long been a hidden menace in the region, face a new threat vector. Kyiv has already demonstrated the ability of its surface drones to track and severely damage Russian submarines while they were surfaced or docked. The shallow, constrained topography of the Gulf makes maneuvering diesel-electric submarines difficult, turning them into prime targets for prowling autonomous hunters. By importing this capability, the Gulf states have found a tailored countermeasure to secure their shipping lanes without risking their flagship vessels. The capability to neutralize Tehran's primary maritime leverage is a game-changer for regional security. However, the government in Kyiv is not transferring this paradigm-shifting technology out of simple goodwill. In the ruthless arena of international geopolitics, providing the ultimate defensive shield comes with a very specific, strategic price tag. The recent diplomatic maneuvers reveal a stark transaction at the heart of these new alliances. On April 19th, Ukraine officially formalized 10-year defense agreements with three key regional players: Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar. These deals are not standard foreign aid packages or one-way transfers of military charity. They represent a highly calculated, equal partnership built on the two most fundamental currencies of national survival: uninterrupted energy and autonomous security. For a country actively fighting off a massive land invasion, securing a long-term foothold in the Middle East marks a staggering evolution in its foreign policy. For Kyiv, the strategic timing of this agreement is tied directly to its operational stamina. Following a brutal winter campaign where Russian airstrikes systematically targeted and degraded Ukrainian power grids and civilian infrastructure, maintaining a reliable fuel supply has become a critical vulnerability. An industrial war machine runs on diesel, and domestic production simply cannot meet the massive demands of an active, high-intensity front line. By positioning itself as a premier supplier of advanced maritime defense technology, Ukraine has successfully negotiated an essential strategic lifeline. Under the framework of these newly minted security pacts, the Gulf states are facilitating the direct flow of energy resources back to Eastern Europe. Raw crude will be routed through European refineries, processed into usable military-grade fuel, and transported directly into Ukraine to power armored columns and logistical hubs. In several immediate instances, these partner nations are bypassing the European refining step entirely, providing shipments of refined diesel straight to Kyiv. This ensures that the Ukrainian military does not stall out in the mud during crucial operations. This dynamic perfectly illustrates the reality of modern geopolitical bartering among middle powers. The Gulf states command vast financial reserves and control massive petroleum outputs, but they currently lack the proprietary, combat-tested technology required to rapidly defeat asymmetric drone swarms. Conversely, Ukraine possesses world-leading expertise in autonomous strike systems and intercepts, but desperately requires the fuel and financial backing to sustain its fight against Moscow. The exchange surgically addresses the most pressing vulnerabilities of both parties. The partnership also extends far beyond raw petroleum transfers. Alongside the steady energy provisions, Ukraine is also securing vital financial assistance and a reverse flow of interceptor munitions from the Gulf to bolster its own heavily strained air defense networks. It is a closed, highly effective strategic loop. Kyiv provides the specialized naval and aerial drones necessary to secure the Strait of Hormuz, and the Gulf provides the material resources necessary to keep Ukraine fighting on the continent. By quietly sidestepping traditional Western supply chains, Ukraine has elevated its status from a heavily dependent proxy to a foundational security provider in one of the world's most volatile regions. This independent diplomatic maneuvering ensures their continued survival, regardless of the shifting political winds in Washington or Brussels. However, as these new Ukrainian maritime drones hit the water, they are entering a complex arena that is already heavily managed and monitored by another dominant global force. The arrival of Ukrainian surface drones in the Gulf does not occur in a strategic vacuum. It intersects directly with a massive ongoing operation led by the United States, a campaign that fundamentally alters the maritime environment in the Strait of Hormuz. While the narrative often focuses on direct military confrontations, Washington has been executing a highly targeted, selective maritime blockade. Its primary objective is not to halt all commercial traffic, but to surgically dismantle the clandestine networks that sustain Iran's asymmetric capabilities. This effort is aimed squarely at the shadow economy. For years, Tehran has circumvented international sanctions by utilizing a dark fleet of aging tankers, frequently disabling their automatic identification systems and conducting illicit ship-to-ship oil transfers in open water. Much of this embargoed crude ultimately flows east, feeding China's massive energy demands and generating the off-the-books revenue required to fund the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Breaking this cycle requires more than just conventional patrols. To combat this evasion, the U.S. and its coalition partners have shifted toward an AI-driven surveillance model. By layering satellite imagery, advanced data analytics, and autonomous tracking systems, American forces can identify and intercept specific vessels engaged in the shadow energy trade. This selective interdiction is highly effective at applying economic pressure, but it demands an immense amount of operational bandwidth. Utilizing multi-billion-dollar Arleigh Burke-class destroyers to constantly monitor smuggling routes is an enormous drain on U.S. naval readiness, especially when those same ships are needed to fend off sudden drone swarms. This is where the strategic alignment between the Gulf states, Ukraine, and the United States comes into sharp focus. By independently acquiring and deploying Ukrainian Magura drones, nations like Saudi Arabia and the UAE are taking direct responsibility for their immediate tactical security. They no longer have to rely exclusively on the American security umbrella to swat away incoming Shaheds or intercept harassing fast boats. The Gulf states can handle the asymmetric swarm threats using their own low-cost, expendable drone fleets. Consequently, this localized self-reliance frees up vital U.S. and allied naval assets. Instead of acting as heavily armed escorts for every passing commercial freighter, American destroyers can focus their advanced radar and command capabilities on managing the wider AI-driven blockade and maintaining strategic deterrence against higher-tier threats. The result is a highly robust, multi-layered defensive web. The U.S. suffocates the illicit financial pipelines, while the Gulf states, armed with battle-tested Ukrainian technology, lock down the physical waterways against asymmetric attacks. It is an incredibly tight, coordinated trap. But as the pressure on Tehran's economy and its naval doctrine reaches a critical threshold, the regime is unlikely to simply accept defeat and withdraw. The assumption that Tehran will simply absorb these new tactical disadvantages and quietly abandon its maritime strategy is a dangerous miscalculation. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps operates with a highly adaptable, asymmetric mindset. When confronted with a technological wall, they do not retreat. They probe for structural vulnerabilities. As Ukrainian-designed surface drones begin patrolling the Strait of Hormuz, Iran will rapidly shift its operational calculus to neutralize this new robotic threat, turning the Gulf into a highly volatile testing ground for electronic and multi-domain warfare. The first and most immediate Iranian countermeasure will likely unfold in the electromagnetic spectrum. Unmanned surface vessels, regardless of their autonomy, require robust data links and satellite communications to effectively hunt moving targets and coordinate with aerial interceptors. Iran possesses substantial electronic warfare capabilities and will almost certainly attempt to create massive signal dead zones across the choke point. By aggressively jamming GPS and satellite frequencies, Tehran aims to sever the connection between the Magura drones and their operators, rendering the multi-million-dollar defensive screen deaf and blind in the water. If electronic disruption fails, the IRGC will likely revert to a brutal, low-tech alternative: area denial through naval mines. Unlike commercial supertankers that sit deep in the water, surface drones are nimble and ride low, but they cannot survive a direct encounter with a dense, hidden minefield. Iran has a long history of utilizing indiscriminate sea mines to control maritime traffic. By saturating the shallow approaches to the strait, they could create physical barriers that destroy the autonomous escorts before they ever get a chance to engage a fast boat swarm. However, the most severe escalation risk lies not on the water, but on land. These sophisticated naval and aerial drones require terrestrial infrastructure. They need maintenance bays, launch facilities, and highly secure command and control nodes. More importantly, they require human operators. With Ukrainian specialists actively training Gulf military personnel, the physical locations housing these drone hubs will immediately become high-priority targets for Iranian intelligence. This presents a terrifying regional tripwire. If Tehran feels that its naval leverage has been entirely stripped away by this new drone network, they may choose to bypass the proxy sea battle altogether. A precision ballistic missile strike or a covert sabotage operation directed at a drone control center inside the United Arab Emirates or Saudi Arabia would instantly shatter the containment of the shadow war. It would force a direct, kinetic confrontation between regional state powers, dragging the entire multi-layered coalition into a broader, uncontrollable conflict. We are witnessing a fundamental rewrite of global naval doctrine. For the last 80 years, securing a strategic waterway like the Strait of Hormuz required a massive, centralized projection of power, usually in the form of an American carrier strike group. That era of undisputed heavy metal naval supremacy is rapidly drawing to a close. As Ukraine's battle-tested surface drones enter the arsenals of the Gulf states, the barrier to entry for effective maritime deterrence has plummeted. Middle powers no longer have to wait for Washington to deploy a fleet to secure their economic lifelines. By leveraging cheap, autonomous, and highly lethal technology, nations like Saudi Arabia and the UAE can now execute the same untouchable siege tactics that paralyzed the Russian Black Sea Fleet. This proliferation of advanced unmanned systems is democratizing maritime power. It allows regional actors to actively counter asymmetric threats with asymmetric solutions of their own. Iran's reliance on fast boat swarms and loitering munitions is suddenly a vulnerability rather than an advantage, as the Gulf states prepare to meet them with an even more expendable, networked robotic force. The strategic reality in the Middle East is no longer just about who controls the physical choke points. It is about who holds the technological edge in the water. As the naval balance of power shifts from massive destroyers to explosive drone swarms, the rules of maritime conflict are being rewritten in real time. Drop a like if you found this analysis valuable, and let us know in the comments how you think Iran will respond to this new technological threat. Thanks for watching.